So I think in the edge world, and a lot of people want more control over that. They want control over their AI, right? They want to be able to know what data is being trained on. They want to run the AI workloads without paying a cloud tax, right? So we're seeing a pendulum shift for sure toward the edge on AI as it gets more capable. Connectivity is getting a lot better worldwide. And so we're seeing it used and deployed for more of these solutions like energy and gas and oil and retail. They are developing new techniques for optimizing memory, because typically the edge is more memory bound for generative AI than it is kind of processor bound. We're seeing that kind of ability to do generative AI paired with kind of more traditional sensors and machine learning. And I think we're going to see some really interesting and probably amusing and helpful scenarios moving forward.
Welcome to Forging the Future, and I'm here today in Austin, Texas at Embedded World 2024, sitting down with Pete Bernard, who is the Executive Director of tinyML Foundation, and he has extensive experience in edge computing products and partnerships.
Yes, I do.
Thanks for coming on the show.
You. Yeah.
So tinyML.
Yeah.
Sounds small. What's that about?
Yeah, it's really a collection of technologies like anything else out there. It's really everything from we say from tinyML to the edge of AI. So there's all this work happening in AI in edge computing. And that could be edge ML, efficient ML, analog AI, tinyML. So tinyML is just a kind of a term of art that's been used to describe that kind of this collection of stuff. I think edge AI technologies is probably a more relevant term for folks. But it really describes, I call it connecting AI to the real world. And how do you run AI workloads and models in things that are happening in real time in the real world, right? In water systems and agriculture, things like that. So it's really an interesting kind of technology and techniques that people are using to try to do that stuff.
As an entrepreneur, I know the importance of proactive legal advice. Hunton Andrews Kurth has been a leader for over 120 years, offering top-notch support in energy, finance, real estate, and retail. They handle problems like their own. Hunton Andrews Kurth, they get it done. Is there a difference nowadays between AI and ML? Everyone's kind of struggling.
It's a bit of an esoteric distinction. You could argue ML is around, data sets that are very data-driven, where AI could be data sets that are more knowledge-driven. But that's kind of a bit of a PhD level topic that most people don't care about.
How much can be done on the edge now with AI? People think of AI and it's, I need a nuclear power plant and a data center,
right?
And a lot of, a huge LLM with, a gazillion neurons or whatever they call them.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge. That's an understatement. I read somewhere that the human brain operates at about 20 watts of power, and an equivalent data center would be something like 50 gigawatts of power or something like that. So obviously, the way AI is being rolled out in data centers right now is not very power efficient. I think that's, again, a big understatement. But there's a ton that can happen on the edge. The semiconductor advancements, the connectivity advancements enable, all kinds of scenarios that enable you to analyze the data in real time and make decisions without having to go back to the cloud.
So what is the foundation trying to do? Are you SDKs, APIs?
We're a community building organization. Okay. So we're a nonprofit. Our goal is to be the epicenter of edge AI technologies, to be a place where people can contribute, their knowledge and get knowledge out. We're supported by kind of the biggest tech companies out there, as well as startups and VCs. Contribute to our support. We work closely with academia, colleges and universities around the world. We work with NGOs like the UNICC and ITU on sustainable development goals. So we're really about just building that community, helping people learn about the state of the art and moving the whole thing forward.
Okay. And you had a lot of experience at Microsoft.
I did.
Did that influence your role at tinyML at all?
Yeah, I spent 18 years at Microsoft, 14 years in Silicon Valley. Before that, I've always been involved in sort of where software meets hardware You know, I was actually started as a BIOS engineer for Phoenix Technologies for people that
I remember Phoenix.
Okay, there you go. So,
Are they still around?
they're still around.
Okay.
Yeah, I follow them on LinkedIn. It's kind of neat to see that. But you know, at Microsoft, I spent time on the Windows Phone platform, Windows Mobile. I was on the original Zune music player team, the Kin team. Like I tell people any kind of weird devicey thing that Microsoft did for a long time, I was involved with. And so when I left in 2023, I was sort of like, well, you know, I still have a passion for the space. And I had been working in the Edge AI space for a few years and part of the Azure engineering team. So I knew some of the folks at this foundation, and they were looking for an executive director. And I thought, oh, this kind of checks a lot of boxes for me, because I had been doing some nonprofit work as well. And so it's a way for me to, you know, help grow that community and stay on top of new things. So it's pretty exciting.
Well, what are some of the challenges facing the edge computing industry today?
Yeah, well, I mean, part of it is the pace. The pace of change is just tremendous. I mean, we're here at the show, you know, you're seeing things here that, you know, didn't exist last year, maybe even 6 months ago. And so I think on the buy side, like when I was at Microsoft, I worked with, you know, folks at Chevron and Domino's and all these Fortune 100s. They're looking to solve problems, right, with their business. But the solutions, the pace of change of the solutions is so great. Like that's one of the challenges, I think. I mean, it's not a bad problem to have, but it does pose challenges about, like, you know, what tech should I be using to roll this out? I was actually at an aerospace conference recently, and some of the folks there were like, they have like 10-year development cycles, right? And they told me like multiple times they had to restart projects because like 2 years into it, the tech had evolved so quickly that it would just be obsolete by the time they finished. So I think that's like an interesting challenge in tech, especially in Edge, is like the pace of change is so quick.
Well, interesting though, right? Because I've been in tech for 40 years. I always described it like drinking from the fire hose, right? You know, and the technologies were changing. My DOS skills aren't doing anything for me anymore. Your BIOS skills aren't really that useful, right? So, and you just have to keep learning, constantly learning new stuff coming out. But it does seem that it's speeding up even more. It
does, yeah. And the state of the art stuff, and you know, when as a Fortune 100 or a CTO or CPO do you make the bet on what tech to use? You know, what chip to use, what software architecture, and it also means the deployment and development of this stuff has to speed up too. So you know, it shouldn't take you 2 years to deploy something. It should take you 6 months. And so there's a lot of companies in our community trying to speed that stuff up, right? Trying to put the pieces together easier, you know, putting data sets out there, models, all kinds of training. So
yeah, how do you speed it up?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is like we are actually going to be launching a new initiative around community code. So we'll be publishing data sets and models and code samples for the community in different industries, different what we call blueprints, to help people sort of get a head start on things. So you want to sort of, you know, get to that commercialization point as soon as possible. Part of it is too, we do a lot of best practices work with our working groups. So, you know, we have like Qualcomm in there and ST Micro and a bunch of folks, and they can work together on, well, here's this particular thing that's kind of causing the whole industry a bit of a logjam. You know, is there a way we can smooth it out a little bit? So part of it is that too. And then there's lots of solution providers in the mix too that are, you know, coming out with, you know, kits and, you know, there's Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and things like that, and Particle, these companies that have pretty well-formed solutions that you could sort of package up and kind of pretty close to done, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, back in the DOS days, it was libraries and SDKs.
Yeah, back in the DOS days. Like actually, I saw Ray Ozzie last night.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, he was at this IoT Stars event, and we were talking because he was at Microsoft for a while, and I had interacted with him there. And I used to be a Lotus Notes developer way back when.
Now we're getting the way back.
Yeah, now we're talking. So, but yeah, back then, I mean, it was very hands-on code, and now everything is very abstracted, and you know, your code is calling into dependencies. You're not exactly sure what's going on in there. So it's a new world in that regard.
Well, and I talked to some of our own programmers. In my day, I'd have to go to Barnes and Noble and try to buy a book and hope I had the answer into it, and I had to find the answer.
Yeah.
Now it's like, besides Google, you have ChatGPT.
Yeah, just ask your AI agent.
You've got AI co-pilots that are writing code for you as you type it, and or you can even have it do your first draft of the code, right? Write me a routine that does this, and then go in there and edit it. But on the other hand, they're also having to do things a lot faster, right? And so
true, and it's and much more complex.
Mm-hmm.
Especially some of these edge systems that are being deployed. They're in real critical infrastructure. We're talking about like water systems. Measuring the temperature of railroad tracks. This has to be done correctly because it's really safety and security. I don't think you had those kind of systems out there a couple of decades ago. And so as we see technology sort of get infused into all of this kind of critical infrastructure, it really, you have to be thoughtful about how you implement it and test it and validate it. So
how do you ensure that happens? Because you hear the stories, at least before, when the IoT devices were first coming out. You've got light bulbs and Wi-Fi and all this stuff that's just was very easily hackable, right?
Yeah.
They didn't even do anything that would prevent it. It's like not changing the code in your garage door opener, right? Remember those where you could go down the neighborhood and just take the standard garage door opener and open like 6 garages on the street, But has it changed now, or people are more?
Yeah, I think people are more security first oriented, or zero trust networks. There's a lot more you mentioned about education. Educating about how to architect systems where there's kind of a zero trust thing. There's encryption of AI models, at rest. There's encryption of the data in motion. There's encryption capabilities built into the hardware these days. So at the end of the day, it has to be architected correctly. There's kind of no excuse not to do it correctly, although sometimes people do. But there's a lot more, I think, knowledge out there about how to do it right. And unfortunately, there have been a lot of lessons learned, like you said, over the years.
Well, it's difficult. First of all, cybercrime is just skyrocketing, right? And then you see even, large companies, whether it's Microsoft, et cetera, you're having to put out patches all the time. You have, the VPNs and firewalls and anti-cyber stuff like CrowdStrike also having their own issues. Not quite sure how that got rolled out without some kind of testing.
Yes.
But
Yuck.
Not following some best practices of like an extended rollout, for example. Don't just blast it out to everyone. Maybe blast it out to a few people, or like 100 people or 1,000 people. And
right.
If it breaks, then you don't have to.
It's sort of like there's the architecture and then there's the human element of like what's just a really good, like a bad idea. Access to sort of root level stuff, even though it may be convenient, is not a good idea. You have things like two-factor authentication. We have that in our daily lives. A lot of people don't sign up for two-factor authentication because it's kind of inconvenient. But what's more inconvenient if someone actually, gets into your Ring doorbell or whatever. So, it's part human engineering and code engineering too.
Is tinyML focusing on safety and security? That's been kind of a theme here at the conference.
Yeah, we do have a lot of interest in making sure, we've been talking about, like, one of the interesting topics is around the data provenance. So, the data set, where did the data set come from? How was the model trained? How do I know it hasn't been kind of messed with? How do we watermark some of this data? So I think there's a lot of interest in that. I think we'll see a lot more interest in sort of watermarking AI, so that people understand, the whole supply chain, frankly, of the data. So that's a hot topic for sure.
Hey, so how do you really know? Essentially the AI is only as good as what the data has been trained on. And if the data was corrupted in some way or is lacking in some way, it's not going to actually give you the right answer. And it's really difficult to see, right? Because the way the models work,
there's not a lot of transparency and there's not a lot of auditing ability, and that's something that's desperately needed. It's one of the reasons why we're going to be publishing some community data sets, high quality data sets that come from academia that have been validated and verified. So people are last known good, starting from that. But a lot of these systems, like especially edge systems, that's very specific training, right? So usually you're in control of the data you're training on. these larger, the chat GPT stuff, it's trained on the internet or a bunch of YouTube videos, and who knows what's in there, right? Usually not good stuff.
There's a lot of wrong information on the internet.
So you wouldn't use that data to like kind of measure a railroad track temperature, right?
Yeah.
So I think in the edge world, and a lot of people want more control over that. They want control over their AI, right? They want to be able to know what data is being trained on. They want to run the AI workloads without paying a cloud tax, right? And have control over the output for privacy reasons, quality reasons too. So we're seeing a pendulum shift for sure toward the edge on AI as it gets more capable.
I think it makes sense to have, somehow watermarking those data sets, right? But I don't know how you see the watermark. Do you see any synergy between 5G and AI impacting the future of edge computing?
Well, there's always this interesting kind of Venn diagram overlap of like AI, 5G, and semiconductors. Like connectivity, I would say, in general, is a big enabler for a lot of these systems, right? Especially if you look at systems, whether it's 5G, there's licensed spectrum and unlicensed spectrum. So like I'm a fan of LoRaWAN and as well as like 5G stuff.
Why are you a fan of LoRaWAN?
Well, I mean, I just think
5G,
I think there should be a variety of ways of connecting things, and there's the licensed spectrum and unlicensed spectrum have their pluses and minuses, and it's sort of like I think the UK term is horses for courses, right? So depending on what solution you want to deploy, you should find the right connectivity solution for it. But connectivity in general, especially higher performance connectivity, is definitely enabling some new AI capabilities, because then what we're really going to see is AI workloads running at different elements between the edge and the cloud, like together. So we're stitching together AI workloads from the edge to the cloud, and that means good connectivity and in many cases wireless connectivity too. So 5G definitely has a role to play.
It always seems like it's never quite good enough. I mean, I know I'm like half a mile off of I-10 or something, and it's like I've got like one bar, and I'm like, why? I mean, this is like a major transportation corridor. I'm not in the middle of the boonies somewhere.
Good question for your local telco and their cell tower investments, I guess.
It's the trees. I don't know. I mean, I know there's a tower not too far from me, but you'd think I'd have 5 bars, and I'm in a major metropolitan area, right? And so,
well, even in Bellevue, Washington, I live a block from Microsoft, and there's a dead spot right where I get on 140th, and I'm just like, how could there be a dead spot here? Like we are literally a block from Microsoft. But that's that's kind of a good engineering discussion somewhere. But the good news is like connectivity is getting a lot better worldwide in general, except for my neighborhood apparently. And so we're seeing it used and deployed for more of these solutions like energy and gas and oil and retail, healthcare. We have this idea of the peel and stick AI sensor, that you can, has a battery in it that can last a decade and can stick on the wall and count people in a room and do stuff like that. All that requires connectivity, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think once they get that battery technology figured out too, or stuff actually lasts longer than like a day,
well, a lot of that is the semiconductors, right? So you're seeing all these new semiconductors being introduced, new processes, right? These smaller processes, which means it consumes a lot less power. And so you're seeing, sub-milliwatt type of AI, which is really amazing. So like in hearing aids and stuff, like you can see it in like the new AirPod Pros and stuff like that, right? They're doing AI, they're doing machine learning on noise reduction and things like that. So we're starting to see the silicon manufacturers, startups and established folks do some amazing stuff there.
Can we get someone to work on the smoke alarms so that they don't beep at 4 o'clock in the morning?
Oh, good question. Yeah.
I swear there's some code in there that says if battery low and 4 a.m. start beeping.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like,
as inconvenient as humanly possible. Yeah.
And then the UI is also terrible because you're like trying to look and see, is the light blinking?
Yeah.
Does that mean it's time? Is that the one that's making the noise?
Right.
So I've got like 25 in my house or different devices, right?
Feels like an opportunity for someone out there, a startup, to solve that problem.
Maybe they don't care enough about it. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, really. I mean, come on. I mean, everybody hates this. It's kind of a problem.
But it's funny you mentioned that. So this is like a great example where the market people are used to paying so much for smoke alarms, let's just say, right? You go to Home Depot, it's on the end cap, and
it's
you're not going to pay
whatever it is.
Whatever.
Right? Yeah.
And so you're like, well, I'm going to develop this really great one, but it's $50. It's like, well, it's going to die, So it's funny how like a lot of these improvements run into these kind of product market fit issues. Right.
And actually, now that you mention it, we saw that. I think Nest came out with a smoke alarm, and they had like a wave to dismiss alarm thing, and then they had to remove it because of some rule or regulation or something like that. Like, no, you can't do that. It's got to keep beeping or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so,
regulatory issues.
Yeah. So you can solve problems. You can solve the technical challenges, but then people don't want to pay the extra $3.
Sure.
Or the regulators are like, no, you can't do that.
Right.
Right. But anyway, maybe I'll.
That's the opportunity. Somewhere in there's the opportunity for someone to innovate and disrupt with low price but regulatory compliant smoke alarms.
That's true. I need to keep my eye out for smoke alarm.
Exactly.
Startup. Well, what about ethical considerations for companies and AI-driven products? Any thoughts there?
So, we have a lot of interest and efforts around what we call responsible AI, right? And so sometimes that responsibility is impactful to communities to help them, grow and thrive. We see a lot of deployments in countries that are, struggling with kind of agriculture and water systems and clean water and things like that. So that's part of responsible AI. The different companies have different policies around how they license their AI and what it's used for. And, that's kind of a tricky space for sure.
You mean like trying to help the world versus like, hey, you can use my AI to help people with water, but I don't want my AI used by the Defense Department or something? Yeah,
there's some companies that have different policies on licensing their tech. It's a tough one, I think. I mean, that's been an issue since the beginning of time, with gunpowder, frankly, when they invented that. So, how do you take this technology and make sure it's used for good? It's a tough one.
Well, I think, the approach of edge AI makes a lot of sense because not everything has to be, have enough power to become, self-aware, right?
Right.
So
self-aware smoke alarms.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you look at like an ant. An ant doesn't have the brain power to ever be a threat to you, right? But it can do a lot of things. And so that's why I see like a lot of devices, they're never going to have that extra power, and they don't need it.
Right.
They only need to do certain things. And that also, I think, maybe helps on the safety angle.
I think so. I mean, I think, having that local control of the AI that's happening, and usually it's really fit for purpose, like you said.
Yeah.
It's very helpful. Now, I mean, these things usually work with the cloud in some form, right? You can say like, look, I want to analyze data over time, like time series insights and things like that. That's like the cloud is great for that, or looking at a lot of kind of ambiguous data and finding patterns in it. But a lot of problems that need to be solved can be solved on the edge. That's just the bottom line.
There's still a lot of room for that, right? I mean, I've got 5 years of history of health data and, sleep data and et cetera, but it's just data.
Yes.
And there's not a layer on top yet that's trying to draw some conclusion of like, well, I mean, they're starting to get some of that in some of the apps and trying to show, variations in, your heart rate variation and how that's changed over time and what that could maybe trigger. But I still think there's a lot more that is coming to really help us manage your health and not just like, oh, I got 10,000 steps in.
Yeah, exactly. No, I'm a food. I log my food. I log my steps. I'm kind of waiting for something to help me analyze that and say like, oh, this pattern matches this other pattern, and that'd be kind of cool to get there. You also run into regulatory and privacy issues there too, right? So it's like, well, how do you share your health data and keep it private? And I have some concerns about who has my health data exactly. I mean, it kind of says who does, but I don't know exactly how that works. So that's where you run into those other issues of like privacy and again, it gets back to transparency, and auditability.
Yeah, you want that to be saying like, hey, I see that you're. It looks like due to the food that you're logging, you're going to be, vitamin D deficient if you don't start drinking a little milk once in a while or whatever it is, right? And,
or why don't you add a glass of grapefruit juice in once in a while so you don't get scurvy or something.
Yeah, that's right. And drink a glass of orange juice today. That would be a good idea. Has Gen AI come to the edge yet?
Yeah, so it's actually really fascinating. We have a big event, online event coming up October 17th, 18th. It's like a free thing. We have 2 days worth of talks about generative AI on the edge. And what we're seeing now, even from 6 months ago, is people are building foundational models for the edge, like transformer-based architecture for the edge specifically. They are developing new techniques for optimizing memory, because typically the edge is more memory bound for generative AI than it is kind of processor bound. And so we're seeing all this really cool stuff and some cool deployments too. So we're seeing folks like kind of pairing up a generative AI, like a large language model, with sensors. So you could go to a piece of equipment that has all these sensors in it and say, you know, what's wrong with you, right? And the equipment can actually tell you what's wrong with it. Or, you know, if there's something in your car that you can't figure out, you can just ask your car, how do I turn this off? You know, how do I turn this feature off? And the car can tell you how to turn it off, right? So we're seeing that kind of ability to do generative AI paired with kind of more traditional sensors and machine learning. And I think we're going to see some really interesting and probably amusing and helpful scenarios moving forward. But it's definitely a hot topic, and it's really, people are pushing the envelope about how do I fit these, what, you know, originally large language models into more edge equipment. Yeah, it's really cool.
Well, I think that, again, narrowing things down. For example, the car doesn't need to know anything else except the car. It doesn't have to know politics or history.
Haiku poem or whatever.
Yeah,
no,
right.
It just didn't.
Write me a poem. I just need you to tell me, how do I, you know, check my tire pressure? Like, where's the freaking menu option for that?
Exactly.
You know? And I felt like there would be an opportunity at some point, like your laptop should be a little bit smarter, right? In that it's monitoring. It does some of this, but like, hey, your laptop should be looking at what processes are running in the background. It can do things like, hey, this is a new process that hasn't been there before, and I already checked the internet. It doesn't look like a very good process. I've turned it off for you right now, but if you really do need it,
although there's that old Clippy issue. You don't want to see it. It looks like you're trying to print something, you know. So
my favorite one of that is, it looks like you're trying to write a suicide note. Yeah, it's like, let me help you. But but I mean, being able to say like, hey, your computer's running, it's been running hotter lately, and you're like, you know, maybe you don't want to have 450 Chrome tabs open, you know, or whatever it is.
Well, hopefully, like this Copilot stuff and then the PC stuff, they'll be able to, they're infusing more and more stuff in there more proactively. But
they haven't had the Copilot for the OSs really. I mean, like you said, there was Clippy or whatever. There's Copilots for editing code.
Right.
But, you know,
we have the Copilot PC now, or Copilot Plus. Yeah, I think it's called.
Well, they're still fairly difficult to use. Like, you know, okay, my mom's 80 years old and she has a laptop, and you know, I mean, it's like, how do you do things? Right. How do I where do I turn the Wi-Fi on?
Yeah, I want to Zoom with my son. How do I do that?
Exactly. Like, fire up. I want to do a video call, and you know, it's actually, you know, pretty complicated to walk people through that.
Yeah, it is.
I remember when I set up my grandmother's, she was very interested in music, and she had a CD player that had like 20 CDs, and she just didn't like how noisy it was and all that. And I'm like, what if I could tell you that I can set you up a music player that makes zero noise and has every single CD you own on it, right? And obviously it's an iPod, but then, you know, you start thinking about the interface for an iPod, which Apple always touts, say, user-friendly, whatever. It's still complicated, you know, to find a song or play a song or set up a play track or switch between a playlist. You know, you want to switch between your normal playlist and a Christmas playlist. And you start like writing down the steps of like explaining how to do it. It's, you know, wasn't going to work. So I got a Bose player and put the iPod in there, and the remote control had like 4 buttons on it, which is all you need. Like next, previous, volume, and off, right? You know, it's like,
well, you know, successful companies know how to navigate that UX space pretty well. But yeah, hopefully Gen AI can help a little bit there too.
Well, then the user interface becomes English.
Right.
And I don't need to be a programmer. I just need to know how to speak English. I can talk to my device and it'll answer me.
Assuming that you speak English.
Or whatever other language. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's taken a long time for devices like Alexa, which in my, you know, I like to say is like dumber than a stone for some reason.
I think we're going to look back on Alexa and Siri and be like, that was a good idea, but maybe the implementation fell short.
Yeah.
That was like 7 or 8 years ago it was introduced. And, you know, unfortunately, it kind of burned a lot of folks on that. We were talking about the other day, like automotive interfaces, like talking about this, like they had those in the cars for a long time, going back a decade. and they never really worked. And so you burn a lot of folks saying, I tried to do that, my lights didn't turn on, so whatever, just put the switch back. And so hopefully, like, as these things get infused, people will give it another try. But that was a tough one, because I think everyone had those Alexa things, and then it turned out to like only be able to like tell you the weather, I think, or something. And
play music, or even then it doesn't really use the historical context, your even local data of the songs that you play. Your 5-year-old that's played that song 200 times, and she's trying to ask to play it again, and then it comes up with some rap song or something that she's never played, and it's like, that doesn't make any sense. It was a big step up in language interfaces, that you could talk to your music player and play a song, but you also had to know kind of the API and the format, because it wanted to have things in like perfect grammar order.
Right. We had those wake words and all that stuff, and that stuff's come so far. It's just a matter of rolling it out now and getting people to sort of re-engage.
Have you tried the ChatGPT voice interface yet?
Yeah, no, I've done that. It's fantastic, and I've been a big fan of this. I remember back when I started at Microsoft with Windows Mobile, we had some app that was like you could talk into your phone and it would do commands. Voice Command, I think it was called. I don't know. You can look it up on YouTube. And when it worked, it was really cool, but it worked like 20% of the time. But that 20% was like magical, right? So I think if we can get it to where, it becomes kind of just standard issue, like you just expect it to work and it works, I think it could be pretty transformative. But I think you and I, we have a high tolerance for pain on those things. Most people do not.
Well, then an understanding that helps to know, like, I see what it's having trouble with, and so I'm going to reword this in a different way instead of saying the same sentence 4 times over.
Right, or like I won't incriminate anyone in my family, but some family members just kind of shout at it.
Talk louder, like they're talking to grandma.
It's not going to work.
It's not going to help. Well, super interesting stuff. I'm sure we could talk for another hour. Anything else you want to talk about the future of
I think folks that are interested in this kind of edge AI world, it's really very available for educational resources. Like, we've had over 100,000 students take tinyML courses on edX. There's tons of resources out there. You can get kits from Arduino and do hands-on stuff. If you're kind of just want to upskill and kind of learn some new stuff, I really encourage people to sort of lean in and play with it, because it gives you like kind of a visceral hands-on understanding of AI as opposed to this more abstract kind of ChatGPT thing. And I think it's important for people to kind of understand how it works, because it is going to be just kind of part of our lives, whether we like it or not. It's here to stay, and I think I would just encourage people to sort of lean in and learn about it.
Very interesting. Yeah, and that's also something you can bite off, right? Like you said, you don't have to have the whole AI
you can do some cool projects with it. It's cool to do with your kids as projects. They'll learn about it in school. You can upskill yourself, and go to tinyml.org, of course, to get all more information.
Very nice. Well, Pete, thanks for coming today and sharing.
Appreciate it.
Really interesting stuff going on.
Yeah, thanks.
We live in the future.
That's right.